Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we dig into the research you've been sending us and uncover some really cool stuff. Today, we're going deep into the world of lost sciences. You know, those groundbreaking discoveries that kind of got swept under the rug of history.
Yeah, it's like those boxes of old photos you never get around to looking through, except these photos might just rewrite everything we thought we knew about science.
I love that. And there's something so fascinating about the idea that there's this whole hidden history of science just waiting to be rediscovered. And to start our deep dive, we're going to kick things off with one of the most interesting figures in this lost science world, Baron Karl von Reichenbach, this 19th century scientist who was way ahead of his time.
Reichenbach, now he was something else, a real Renaissance man who made a mark in all sorts of fields, but his most controversial work, the stuff that really raised eyebrows, that was his research into something he called odd.
Odd? Okay, now you've got my attention. What exactly is this odd?
Imagine you walk into a room and you just feel this energy. Not something you can see or touch, but you feel it, you sense it. That's kind of what Reichenbach was trying to describe with odd. He thought it was this subtle energy, a fundamental force of nature that's just everywhere, permeating everything.
So like a cosmic vibe.
Yeah, exactly. But Reichenbach wasn't just going on gut feelings. This guy was meticulous. He did thousands of experiments, worked with hundreds of people, carefully documenting their experiences with this odd. He found that people who were particularly sensitive could actually see odd emanating from things like magnets, crystals, even living beings.
Wait, so people were actually seeing this energy. What did it look like?
Well, based on what his subject said, it seemed to depend on where it was coming from. Some folks described it as this faint glow, others saw flickering flames, some even saw different colors. He even had reports of people feeling warmth, tingling, or even a cool breeze when they were near strong sources of odd.
Okay, that's pretty wild.
And over again, these sensitives describe seeing luminous flames coming from these magnets and crystals. They felt temperature variations depending on which side of the magnet they were near. They even reported experiencing tastes and smells linked to the material.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
But how could he be sure it wasn't all in their heads? I mean, if most people couldn't perceive this odd.
That's a fair point, and it's where Reichenbach's approach went beyond mainstream science. He was dealing with subjective experiences, right? Relying on what people described. But here's the thing, he didn't stop there.
So what did he do? How did he prove this odd was real?
He found ways to objectively demonstrate its existence. He showed that it could be reflected by mirrors, conducted through wires, even stored in materials. Just like other forms of energy, it interacted with the physical world.
Really? So it wasn't just some subjective feeling. He actually showed that odd had measurable effects.
Exactly. And it gets even wilder. He observed that sunlight and moonlight could charge objects with this odd. So it wasn't just confined to a lab. It was out there in the natural world, everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay, now my mind is starting to get blown. So what exactly did Reichenbach think odd was? Was it some form of electromagnetism or something completely new?
That's a question that's still debated today. Reichenbach saw odd as a fundamental force connecting everything in the universe. He even theorized that odd might be the force behind, get this, astrological influences.
Astrological influences. Now that's a bold claim. No wonder the scientific community wasn't too happy with him.
You're right. His ideas were way ahead of their time. Despite his meticulous documentation, his work met with resistance. It was simply too radical for most scientists back then.
But why haven't I ever heard of this in school? If odd is this fundamental force of nature, shouldn't it be, something everyone learns about?
Well, that's the thing about lost sciences, isn't it? Sometimes these big ideas get overshadowed, forgotten, or maybe even, intentionally pushed aside. And Reichenbach, his ideas about odd were just way too out there for the scientists of his time.
They probably thought he was a bit of a kook.
Maybe. But here's the thing. Even though mainstream science never really embraced odd, Reichenbach's work really sparked a lot of interest in the whole concept of subtle energies. Even today, his research is still inspiring people who are exploring things like energy healing, biofields, and how crystals might affect us.
So even though odd isn't exactly a household name, it's like the granddaddy of all these alternative energy ideas that are still being explored today. That's pretty cool.
And it makes you wonder how many other groundbreaking discoveries might be out there just waiting to be rediscovered. And that brings us to another fascinating story, one that revolves around an invention we use every day. The telephone.
Wait, you're going to tell me Alexander Graham Bell didn't actually invent the telephone?
Well, according to Lost Science, the story might be a bit more complicated than that. Enter Antonio Meucci. a brilliant inventor who came to America seeking a better life. This guy was a true polymath. He invented everything from smokeless candles to underwater communication systems.
Smokeless candles. Now, that's an invention I could have used back in the day.
Right. But what's incredible is that he developed a working telephone system years before Bell.
Hold on. Are you saying Bell might not deserve all the credit for the telephone?
It's a question that lost science definitely raises. See, Meucci was driven by a personal need to communicate with his wife, who was bedridden. He combined his knowledge of electricity and acoustics to create a system that could transmit voice over wires.
So he was motivated by love, basically.
You could say that. And here's another amazing thing. He even found ways to power his telephone using electricity drawn from the ground and atmosphere. No batteries needed. A clean energy pioneer way ahead of his time.
Wow, that's incredible. So if he had a working telephone before Bell, what happened? Why don't we learn about Meucci in school?
That's where the story takes a bit of a sad turn. Meucci, despite his brilliance, struggled to patent and commercialize his invention. He had a series of setbacks, including a devastating ferryboat fire that destroyed his workshop and many of his notes. He simply couldn't afford the full patent fees.
So he couldn't afford to fully protect his invention.
Exactly. He ended up filing a caveat which offered some legal protection but didn't grant him full patent rights. And then enter a big corporation, Western Union, with their own ambitions in the booming field of communication.
I'm sensing a conspiracy here.
Yep.
Did Western Union steal Meucci's ideas?
It's hard to say for sure, but the circumstances are definitely suspicious. Meucci tried to collaborate with them, shared his prototypes, everything. But instead of supporting him, they gave him the runaround, ignored his requests for meetings, and, well, his materials vanished.
So by the time Bell's patent for the telephone was approved, Meucci had no way to prove he'd invented it first.
It's a classic David versus Goliath story, and it makes you wonder how many groundbreaking innovations are lost due to similar circumstances. But the good news is, Meucci's contributions haven't been completely forgotten.
Oh, what happened?
In 2002, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a resolution acknowledging Meucci's role in the invention of the telephone.
Well, that's something, at least. It's incredible to think that this one man's desire to connect with his wife led to a technology that connected the entire world. And this, my friends, is just a glimpse into the world of lost science.
We've got many more stories to uncover, stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the history of science and the nature of progress itself.
Now, before we get to our next story, let's take a detour into the world of Earth energies. Ever heard of Nathan Stubblefield?
Stubblefield, oh yes, the Kentucky wizard, a fascinating character, worked outside the traditional scientific circles.
He was like a rural Kentucky version of Nikola Tesla, way ahead of his time. This guy figured out a way to transmit voice signals through the ground, no wires needed.
It's true. And he actually proved it by showing off his ground telephone to these huge crowds of people. He'd plant metal rods into the ground miles apart, connect them to his invention, and people could actually hear each other talking through the earth.
That's nuts. It's like something straight out of a science fiction book.
Yeah.
So why aren't we all using ground telephones today?
Well, like with a lot of lost science stuff, there's a lot of mystery surrounding why Stubblefield's invention never took off. Some people say powerful people who controlled the existing communication systems saw it as a threat and made sure it never went anywhere. Others think maybe it just wasn't as practical or reliable as other communication technologies that were coming up, like radio.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But still, the idea of sending sound through the earth is just wild. It's like there's this whole hidden world of energy and communication we're just starting to understand.
You got it. He was sending wireless messages before Marconi became a household name. Stubblefield had a deep connection to nature, believed the Earth itself held untapped potential.
And his inventions weren't just theories, they were practical. He built a wireless telephone system that connected his entire rural community.
Imagine that, talking to your neighbors without needing to string up wires. A truly democratic technology, accessible and affordable for everyone.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
But like many stories in lost science, Stubblefield's life had a touch of mystery and tragedy. While he achieved remarkable things, he also faced setbacks. His patents were often a bit vague, making it difficult for others to replicate his inventions precisely.
And of course, there's the mystery surrounding his death. Quite strange, really.
Right. When they found him in his cabin, it was unusually warm inside despite the cold weather. And inside, they discovered two highly polished metal mirrors facing each other, radiating heat in rippling waves.
What was he working on? Some kind of secret energy project?
We may never know. But his work, especially his exploration of ground energy, connects to a recurring theme we see in lost science, the idea of alternative forms of energy, perhaps connected to the Earth itself, waiting to be understood.
Like Tesla, maybe Stubblefield was tapping into something that could revolutionize energy production. But for now, his story remains a lost chapter in the history of science. Who knows what secrets it holds?
Speaking of pushing the boundaries of scientific understanding, let's talk about Dr. Robert Rife. Now, this is where we enter some truly controversial territory.
Dr. Rife, a brilliant microscopist who developed a super powerful microscope. It was so advanced it could see viruses in detail that was unheard of at the time.
Wait, how is that even possible?
Rife was a genius. He understood the limitations of conventional microscopes. You can only magnify things so much before the image gets blurry. It's a fundamental principle of optics. But Rife, he found a way around it.
So how did he do it? Some kind of magical lens?
Not magic, but definitely ingenious. He designed a microscope that used prisms and lenses to manipulate light in a way that bypassed those limitations. It was a game changer. He could observe living viruses in their natural state, something no one had ever done before.
That's amazing. So what did he find?
Well, that's where things get really controversial. Through his observations, Rife claimed to have discovered a way to destroy viruses using specific frequencies of light.
Hold on. Is he saying that you can zap a virus with the right kind of light and make it disappear?
That's the essence of his theory. He believed each virus has a unique frequency, like a musical note. And by exposing them to a precise frequency of light, you could disrupt their structure and essentially disable them.
So light is medicine. Did he have any proof that this actually worked?
He documented these treatments, showing some pretty dramatic results. But unfortunately, his claims were met with skepticism and hostility from the medical establishment. They saw his methods as unorthodox and lacking scientific rigor.
Why would they be so resistant if he had evidence?
It's complicated. Some believe that powerful interests, particularly within the pharmaceutical industry, actively tried to discredit Rife and suppress his work. They didn't want his discoveries to disrupt their profits. There are even stories about his lab being raided, his research destroyed, all to protect the status quo.
Wow, it's like something out of a conspiracy movie. But if he was onto something so revolutionary, why didn't it change the world?
It's a question that still haunts researchers today. Much of Rife's original research has been lost or is difficult to verify. But despite the controversy, his work continues to inspire researchers who are exploring the potential of these frequency-based therapies.
It's mind-blowing to think that something as fundamental as light could potentially hold the key to treating diseases.
It is. And it reminds us that sometimes the most revolutionary discoveries come from those who dare to think outside the box.
Speaking of thinking outside the box, let's shift gears a bit and explore a concept that Vassilatos calls dream materialization. It's the idea that our collective imagination can influence the advancement of science and technology.
Dream materialization. So are we talking about actual dreams, the ones we have when we're asleep?
That's exactly what Vassilatos is suggesting. He believes that dreams, visions, even shared cultural narratives can influence the direction of scientific and technological development. He points to examples like the widespread sightings of aeroships in the late 19th century, long before dirigibles or airplanes existed.
Aeroships. So people were dreaming of flying machines before they were even invented, and these dreams somehow paved the way for their actual creation.
A fascinating idea, right? These aeroship sightings were remarkably consistent, describing cigar-shaped flying machines moving silently through the air. And what's even more interesting, these sightings increased in frequency in the years leading up to the development of the first airships.
It's as if our collective imagination was somehow priming us for these new technologies, almost willing them into existence.
It's mind-boggling. But is there any evidence to support this idea? Or is it just a fun theory?
Well, Vassilatos argues that this dream materialization process can be seen throughout history. Visions of space travel predated the space race. Dreams of instant communication led to the telegraph and telephone. It's a reminder that the boundaries of what's possible are constantly being redefined.
It's a truly mind-bending concept. If our dreams can shape reality, what does that say about the power of the human imagination? It makes you wonder, what seemingly impossible ideas are we collectively dreaming into existence today?
That's the question Vassilatos leaves us with. And it's a powerful one. Maybe the future isn't just something that happens to us. Maybe we're actively creating it with our thoughts, our dreams, our collective aspirations.
It's an incredibly hopeful thought, and it ties in nicely with the next concept we'll be exploring. Vassilatos' provocative take on fire and its impact on human consciousness. He seems to be suggesting that fire, while essential for our early development, might also be limiting our understanding of energy.
It's an interesting paradox, isn't it? Something as basic as fire, something that has been so crucial to human progress, might also be holding us back in a way.
Exactly. We've become so accustomed to burning things for energy, wood, coal, oil, that we've limited ourselves to a very specific way of thinking about energy.
It's like we're stuck in this fire-based paradigm, assuming that the only way to get energy is to burn something. But what if there are other ways, other forms of energy that we've overlooked because we're so fixated on fire?
It makes you wonder what else is out there.
Yeah.
What possibilities are we missing because we're trapped in this limited way of thinking?
And that, my friend, is exactly what we'll be exploring in our next deep dive into lost science. We'll uncover forgotten inventors who dared to imagine energy sources that seem impossible, energy that doesn't rely on burning or combustion. Get ready for some truly mind-blowing ideas. You know, what's fascinating is that these lost discoveries make you wonder about our current challenges. What if those suppressed technologies hold solutions to things like energy scarcity?
Right. What if there's a whole treasure trove of knowledge just waiting to be rediscovered? It could revolutionize our world. Vassilatos really makes you think differently about progress. It's not always a straight line forward. Sometimes you have to look back to move forward.
Exactly. And Lost Science definitely explores those unconventional paths. Like, have you heard about the mystery of the glowing rocks?
Glowing rocks. Okay, you've got my attention. Are we talking about some kind of radioactive material?
Not necessarily. There are these historical accounts of luminous stones found all over the world that seem to emit light without any external source. And these weren't just campfire stories. Scientists studied them, even used them for practical applications.
So what was the scientific explanation for this glow? Was it some kind of phosphorescence or bioluminescence like fireflies?
Those were some of the initial theories. But Vassilatos suggests something far more mysterious might be going on. He talks about ancient myths and legends that describe these stones as having magical or spiritual properties.
Wait, hold on. Magical rocks. Are we talking about rocks straight out of a fantasy novel?
It's tempting to dismiss those ancient tales as just superstition. But Vassilatos suggests that maybe there's more to them than we realize. Maybe those ancient cultures were tapping into something we haven't rediscovered yet.
You're saying these glowing rocks were like a glimpse into a hidden world of energy and potential all around us, but we just can't see it with our modern instruments.
Exactly. It connects back to what we discussed with Reichenbach's odd energy and Stubblefield's ground energy. Maybe our current scientific framework is just too narrow, too focused on what we can physically measure to grasp the true nature of reality.
It's a humbling thought, isn't it? But if there are these unseen forces and energies all around us, how do we even begin to study them? Our instruments are designed to measure the physical world, not the metaphysical.
That's a challenge a lot of researchers are grappling with today. It might require a completely different approach, blending scientific rigor with a more open-minded, maybe even intuitive way of perceiving the world.
So, are we ready to move on to another mystery? What else does lost science have for us?
Let's explore something both fascinating and a bit unsettling infrasound. Specifically, its potential applications, and I'm talking both good and evil.
Infrasound. Okay, that sounds ominous. Is this like some kind of secret weapon that only villains in comic books use?
Not quite that dramatic, but infrasound does have some pretty interesting and potentially dangerous properties. It's basically sound that's too low for humans to hear, but that doesn't mean it can't affect us.
Okay, now I'm officially creeped out. So what can infrasound do? Can it control our minds, turn us into zombies?
Nothing quite that dramatic, but it can cause some unsettling effects, both physical and psychological. Nausea, dizziness, feelings of anxiety, even hallucinations. And it can resonate with physical structures, causing vibrations that can actually damage buildings or machinery.
Imagine a sound you can't even hear, making you feel sick and disoriented. That's wild. So how does this tie into lost science? Did someone actually weaponize this stuff?
Vassilatos talks about a French scientist, Dr. Gavreau. He became fascinated by the power of infrasound after experiencing its effects in his lab, totally by accident.
A lab accident. How did that happen?
He was working on an acoustic project when he and his team started experiencing all these weird symptoms. Nausea, headaches, a feeling of dread. At first they thought they were getting sick, but then they realized it was a low-frequency sound wave coming from a faulty piece of equipment.
So it was one of those accidental discoveries like so many throughout history. What did this Dr. Gavreau do with this newfound knowledge about infrasound?
Well, he believed infrasound could be harnessed as a weapon. Think about it. Something that can incapacitate or even kill enemies without bullets or bombs.
That's a chilling thought.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that science can be a double-edged sword.
Exactly. There's potential for both good and evil in every discovery.
So, did he actually build an infrasound weapon?
It's not entirely clear. There's evidence he was funded by the French military to explore infrasound's potential as a weapon, but the full extent of his research and what he achieved is still a mystery. Another one of those lost science enigmas that may never be solved.
It's both fascinating and terrifying that something as seemingly harmless as sound could be weaponized. It's a reminder that we need to be careful with scientific discoveries. We have a responsibility to use knowledge for good, not for destruction.
I agree. Lost science isn't just about celebrating cool inventions. It's about the ethical implications, too. What's our responsibility as a society to ensure that knowledge is used wisely?
Okay, so we've got these stories of lost science, forgotten inventors, suppressed technologies. Is there a common thread that connects them all? Why do these discoveries get lost in the first place?
That's something Vassilatos explores throughout the book. He suggests it's a combination of things. The scientific community can be pretty conservative, hesitant to embrace new ideas, especially if they challenge the status quo.
Makes sense. There are always those who want to maintain the status quo, even if it means suppressing new knowledge.
Right. And then there are powerful interests, like those we saw with Rife, who might actively suppress technologies that threaten their profits or control. And sometimes it's just the simple passage of time. Memories fade, documents get lost, and even groundbreaking discoveries can be forgotten.
It's like there's this constant struggle between those pushing the boundaries of knowledge and those trying to hold things back. But it's important to remember that those daring minds, those who aren't afraid to explore the unknown, they're often the ones who lead us to the greatest breakthroughs.
Absolutely. That's why it's so important to revisit these lost discoveries. We can learn from the past, understand the patterns that lead to the suppression of knowledge, and maybe prevent it from happening again.
Okay, I'm ready for another dose of lost science. Hit me with a story that will make my brain do backflips.
All right, let's talk about Philo Farnsworth. Not only did he invent a technology that changed the world, but he also stumbled upon a potential solution to one of humanity's biggest challenges, fusion energy.
Wait a minute, are we talking about the same Philo Farnsworth who invented the television? Like, the thing I'm looking at right now?
The one and only. This guy was a true visionary. He saw beyond the limitations of his time and imagined technologies that seemed impossible. And while he's famous for television, he also made incredible contributions to nuclear fusion.
Okay, now my mind is officially blown. How did the guy who invented the television end up working on fusion energy? Those seem like completely different fields.
Right, you'd think so. But Farnsworth's journey into fusion began with a device he invented called the multipactor. It was a type of vacuum tube that could amplify electronic signals, a key component in early television systems.
Okay, so how does a vacuum tube for television lead to fusion energy? I'm on the edge of my seat here.
Well, the multipactor used a series of electrodes to create a cascade of electrons which amplified the signal. But what Farnsworth discovered was that under certain conditions, this multipactor could also create a tiny, stable ball of plasma.
Yeah.
You know, that superheated gas, the fourth state of matter.
Plasma, that's the stuff that makes up stars, right?
Exactly. And Farnsworth realized that if he could control and contain this plasma, he might be able to achieve nuclear fusion, the process that powers the sun. He saw a connection between this device he built for television and the possibility of creating a miniature star in his lab.
He was trying to create a star in his lab. That's both awesome and terrifying at the same time. Did he succeed? Did he actually create fusion?
He did. In the early 1960s, Farnsworth's fusion device, which he called the fusor, produced measurable amounts of neutrons. That's a clear sign of nuclear fusion happening. He was fusing atoms together, releasing energy, just like the sun.
That's incredible. So if he achieved fusion, why didn't it change the world? Why aren't we all using fusion power today?
Unfortunately, it's a familiar story. The scientific establishment was skeptical. They were focused on these big government-funded fusion projects and didn't take Farnsworth's approach seriously. They thought it was too simple, too unconventional to work.
It's like we keep seeing this pattern, this resistance to new ideas, especially if they come from outside the mainstream. But even if his fusor didn't lead to practical fusion power right away, it's still a significant achievement, right?
Oh, absolutely. His fusor proved that a relatively simple and inexpensive approach to fusion energy was possible, and it continues to inspire researchers today who are looking for alternative paths to fusion power.
It gives me hope that maybe someday we'll crack the code on fusion energy and solve so many of our energy problems. It's a reminder that we should never underestimate the power of human ingenuity, even when it comes from unexpected places.
I agree. And it shows how crucial it is to keep an open mind, to be willing to explore unconventional paths. Now, ready for another mind-bending concept?
Always. Lay it on me. What's next on our Lost Science adventure?
Let's talk about anti-gravity. The idea of manipulating the very force that keeps us glued to the ground.
Anti-gravity. Are we talking about flying cars and personal jetpacks?
Well, the scientific community is still debating whether that's even possible. But Vassilatos looks at several researchers who claim to have discovered ways to either negate or manipulate gravity.
Okay, color me intrigued. Who were these anti-gravity pioneers and what did they discover? Did they actually have any working devices or was it all theoretical?
One of the most intriguing is Thomas Townsend Brown, an American inventor who claimed to have found a link between electricity and gravity. He even built a device called the gravitator that used high-voltage electrical fields to create thrust. He believed he could use electricity to push against gravity or even cancel it out completely.
So he was basically saying you could use electricity to fight gravity. Sounds like something Tesla would have been interested in.
You're right on the money. Tesla himself hinted at a connection between electromagnetism and gravity, suggesting you could create a gravity shield. But as we've seen with so many of these lost science stories, Brown's work faced a lot of skepticism.
So the mainstream scientific community dismissed his work. That's disappointing, but not surprising at this point. But is there a chance they were wrong? What if we're just not ready to accept the possibility of anti-gravity?
It's a good question, and it underscores how important it is to keep an open mind when it comes to science. We need to be willing to question our assumptions and explore the unknown, even if it sounds fantastical.
So what happened to Brown's research? Did it lead to any real-world applications? Are there secret anti-gravity devices stashed away somewhere?
That's still a mystery. While his gravitator never achieved the dramatic effects he envisioned, it did pave the way for more research into the link between electricity and gravity. Maybe one day we'll rediscover his secrets and unlock a whole new era of anti-gravity tech. Imagine a world with floating cities and spaceships that don't need rockets.
That's a future I'd love to see. But for now, anti-gravity remains a tantalizing possibility, a glimpse into a future we might not be ready for.
And that leads us to another crucial area, lost science, makes us think about alternative energy sources.
It seems like we should be exploring every possible option. So what kind of alternative energy sources does lost science cover?
Vassilatos highlights inventors who claim to have tapped into sources of energy that seem to defy conventional science. And we're not talking about amateur tinkerers here. These are people with scientific backgrounds, conducting experiments and building working devices.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Tell me about these energy pioneers and their incredible inventions.
One of the most fascinating is Dr. T. Henry Moray. He claimed to have developed a device that could extract energy from something he called radiant energy, or cosmic rays.
Radiant energy, cosmic rays. That sounds pretty out there. How did his device supposedly work?
That's a question that has baffled researchers for a long time. Moray was incredibly secretive about his technology. He hinted at using a special antenna to capture these radiant energies and then converting them into electricity.
So he found a way to tap into an energy source that's all around us, but we just can't detect it with our current technology.
It's a fascinating idea, and he didn't just talk about it, he actually built a working device.
He did. So free energy from the cosmos. That's mind-blowing. What happened? Why isn't everyone using this technology?
Well, you guessed it. Moray faced a lot of opposition and skepticism, just like so many others who challenged the established way of thinking. He was accused of fraud, his patents were challenged, he just couldn't get people to accept his technology.
It's like there's this invisible force that resists truly groundbreaking discoveries, especially if they threaten the status quo. But it makes you think, what if Moray was right? What if there's this abundance of energy all around us, just waiting to be tapped into?
That's the challenge lost science throws at us. It's not just about looking back at what might have been. It's about opening our minds to possibilities that might seem impossible at first.
It's a reminder that we should never stop questioning, never stop exploring. Who knows what we might discover if we're brave enough to challenge the limits of what we think we know.
Exactly. There's a whole universe of possibilities out there. We just need to be willing to see them.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're wrapping up our exploration of lost science with a look at something that's both fascinating and a bit mind-boggling: the limitations of how we think about energy.
Yeah, Vassilatos really challenges our assumptions about energy, doesn't he? It's like he's saying our current understanding might be holding us back.
Exactly. He points out that our understanding of energy is so deeply rooted in our history with fire. We're used to burning things for energy. Wood, coal, oil. It's like we're trapped in this thermodynamic box.
It's the way we've always done things. But what if there are completely different ways of thinking about energy, ways we've just overlooked?
I mean, it makes sense. We've been so focused on burning things that maybe we've missed other forms of energy that don't rely on heat or combustion.
Right, like think about Stubblefield and Moray. They seem to be tapping into energy sources that we don't fully understand, energy that's all around us, but we haven't figured out how to access it.
It's almost like we need a new energy paradigm. But what would that even look like?
That's the big question. Vassilatos points out that the laws of thermodynamics, which govern our current understanding of energy, also set limits on what we can do.
Yeah, those laws tell us how much energy we can get from a source, and that we'll always lose some energy when we convert it from one form to another. It's like there's always a cost.
Exactly. But what if there are forms of energy that operate outside those laws? What if we could tap into a source of energy that's truly limitless and doesn't require us to burn anything?
It sounds almost impossible. But then again, so many of the things we've discussed in Lost Science seemed impossible at first.
Think back to Reichenbach's odd energy. It couldn't be easily measured with the instruments of his time, but it had real effects. People could see it, feel it, even taste it. And Reichenbach could reflect it, conduct it, store it. It was a real phenomenon, even if it didn't fit into the accepted scientific understanding.
Yeah, that's true. It makes you wonder if there are other things out there that we're just not equipped to perceive or measure yet.
Exactly. Maybe our current scientific instruments and theories are just too limited to grasp the full scope of reality. And Vassilatos points to other examples, like Tesla and Moray, who both hinted at tapping into energy sources that seem to defy the laws of thermodynamics.
It's like they were on the verge of something truly revolutionary, something that could change the world. But then their discoveries got lost or suppressed.
It's frustrating, isn't it? But maybe that's part of the challenge. We have to be willing to think outside the box, to question our assumptions and explore new possibilities.
So if these inventors were right, if there are these alternative forms of energy out there, how do we even begin to access them? It's like we need a whole new way of seeing the world.
It's a tall order, and honestly, Lost Science doesn't give us a step-by-step guide, but it does encourage us to expand our thinking, to maybe even consider approaches that blend scientific rigor with a more intuitive, holistic understanding of the universe.
It's like we need to rediscover some kind of ancient wisdom, a way of perceiving the world that's more in tune with those subtle energies and forces that we've ignored or dismissed.
Maybe it's about combining the best of both worlds, the precision of modern science, with the open-mindedness of those who are willing to consider the seemingly impossible.
It's been an incredible journey exploring lost science. From glowing rocks to infrasound weapons, from forgotten inventors to suppressed technologies, we've covered a lot of ground. It's really made me rethink what's possible and the importance of challenging the status quo.
I agree. And as we wrap up, I think it's crucial to remember a few key takeaways from Lost Science. First, the history of science isn't a straight line. It's messy, full of twists and turns, dead ends, and rediscoveries. What seems impossible today might be commonplace tomorrow.
And second, scientific progress isn't always just about cold, hard facts and experiments. Intuition, imagination, even dreams can play a role.
And maybe most importantly, the pursuit of knowledge requires courage, persistence, and a willingness to challenge the norms. Those inventors we talked about, they faced ridicule and opposition, but they kept going because they believed in their ideas. That's something we can all learn from.
So as we conclude our deep dive into lost science, we want to leave you with this. Don't be afraid to question what you think you know. Don't dismiss ideas just because they sound strange. Embrace curiosity and never stop exploring the mysteries of the universe.
And who knows, maybe you'll be the one to rediscover a lost scientific treasure and change the world.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible adventure through lost science. We hope it sparked your curiosity and inspired you to keep asking questions. If you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more explorations of the most fascinating topics out there. Until next time, keep seeking knowledge and keep questioning everything.